Hello friends. Today I will be beginning a new series in which I will be introducing the various tribes or clans of the Indo-Aryan period of Indian history or the early Vedic period of Indian history. Now this period lasts for most of the second millennium BC and across the first millennium BC right to about 500 or 600 BC when the first states begin to arise in the Gangatic Valley. And from the 5th century BC, we enter the era of the Mahajanpadas or the Great Republics as they are called. And of course, by the 3rd century BC, the Mauryan Empire would rise from this system. But from the end of the Indus Valley till this period, we have 1,500 years of history. And in history books of India, you generally tend to skip through this period. And right after the Indus Valley civilization, there is a short overview. And then you begin your discussion of the Mahajanpadas, as they are called, the 16 great states from which the Mauryan Empire would rise. But we are not going to do that. We are going to spend some time to study these 1,500 years. And the best way to do that is to look at the histories of individual tribes. And this can be reconstructed from the epic tradition, from the Vedas, from the first Veda, that is the Rig Veda, across the other epic traditions of the Hindu tradition, but also from the early Buddhist tradition and the Jain tradition, which also refers back to this era, this formative era of Indian civilization. And as we will see, many of these clans or tribes or tribal republics would continue to play an important role right throughout this important Mauryan Empire period and the post-Mauryan period, and in fact, in some cases, right till the early medieval era of Indian history, till the 6th or 7th century AD. So let's begin now, and we will begin by discussing the first tribe today, is the tribe of the Kurus. So before we begin, let us briefly discuss terminology. So first of all, is tribe the right way to describe these groups, these social or kinship groups? And I believe it is a good word because if you're familiar with Roman history, that is history of the Roman Republic in the early 1st millennium BC, Roman society was also divided into these tribes. I believe there were 10 tribes initially, and this was later extended into 30 tribes. And this fundamentally represented a society which recognized that it belonged to one ethno-territorial group in the largest scale, but was subdivided into these smaller groups for organizational purposes to begin with, but gradually these groups also began to develop their own identity and their own interests. So similarly, in the Indo-Aryan period, while overall, ethnically, most of the people who were part of this Indo-Aryan society or society of states were ethnically the same people or similar people with similar backgrounds. They had different interests and they were divided into these different tribes, which often went to war with one another. And there was a lot of tribal solidarity, and all of these tribes had their own systems of internal organization. So most of them had elective monarchies, but there were also republics, and in some instances there were also mercenary groups and trading groups. So tribe is a good way. We could use the word clan, but clan is something of a lower scale. Clan refers to blood relations and kinship relations at a lower scale. So you could have clan relations within a royal family, and these clan relations could in fact extend across tribes in case of intermarriage between the royals of one tribe and the royals of another tribe. So we are going to use Indo-Aryan society for the civilization at large. We're going to use tribes for these individual units. And we're going to use clans for royal families. And we will see how all of this comes together to create this complex picture of the geopolitical history of India throughout the 2nd millennium into the 1st millennium BC. So, the Kurus. The Kurus are one of the most ancient and prominent Indo-Aryan tribes. A Kuru king by the name of Kurus is mentioned in the Rig Veda, which is of course the oldest source that we have for the history of this Indo-Aryan civilization. And this Kurus is the subject of a hymn, which is also known as the hymn of Kurus, also interpreted as the glory of the Kurus or the hero of the praises of the Kurus. And in this hymn, a seer or a poet or a sage who narrates this hymn mourns the death of this great king known as Kurus, and he consoles the sons of Kurus that although their father is dead, these sons must now continue the glory of these great people and continue in the footsteps of their great father. So in this hymn, this king, Kurus is also referred to as Trasa Dasyava, or the descendant of Trasa Dasyu. In another hymn of the Rig Veda, this Trasa Dasyu is referred to as a king of a people known as the Purus, or a clan known as the Purus. And these Purus were settled somewhere in the vicinity of the Saraswati river. And with this, we come to some interesting dynamics between different clans and different tribes. So these Purus were initially at war with the people who were the neighbors known as the Tritsu Bharatas, but later they formed an alliance with them to fight against the Kurus. And later, after this war was resolved, the Tritsu Bharata and Puru alliance also commingled with the Kuru alliance to form a greater people known as initially the Kauravyas, but later on, after another cycle of warfare and coalescing, as the Kuru-Panchalas. So we see here the upscaling of a clan into a tribe, into a polity, and gradually, as we will see, into a kingdom and an empire, as this one clan of the Kurus began to associate with more and more people around, initially through warfare, but gradually also through alliance making, and began to gather force. And once it had done so, this clan of the Kurus, the greater Kurus, occupied the central region in north-central India, between the Gangatic and the Yamuna rivers, which is known in ancient history as the Madhya Desa, or the central country. And this place also began to be known as the field of the Kurus, or the Kurukshetra region, which became this great battlefield in central India between these two riverine zones, between the Gangatic Valley system and between the Indus Valley system. And because this was the central geostrategic region, this became the most important region for controlling this location from which both the river systems could be controlled, and of course from where one could also strike out into central India. And of course, this was the region in which many important battles in Indian history were fought, beginning of course with the greatest battle of them all, the Mahabharata. Now interestingly, there is another reference to another Kuru people in ancient literature known as the Uttara Kurus, or the northern Kurus. And these Kurus are mentioned as inhabiting a semi-mythical land somewhere in the distant north, where you have to reach through narrow passes, through high mountain defiles. And this is described as a land of great wealth, where the people are all tall, strong, and great warriors. So of course, this might refer to some semi-mythical association of an original home of the Kurus, from where they might have descended into this greater North Indian battlefield. And there are various hypotheses regarding where this Uttara Kuru might be located. Some people have assumed that this might refer to some region in the Kashmir Valley, or there are even some conjectures that this might refer to the Tarim River Basin. Now I have another series going on simultaneously where I'm reading out key passages from the Travels of Yun Sang. You can refer to that and you will see that this Tarim River Basin was a region where there was tremendous Indian influence right till the 6th or 7th century, and this perhaps began in the early ages of this Indo-Aryan social formation. And the Kushan dynasty, in fact, which made this kingdom in India from the 1st century AD and lasting right till the 3rd or 4th century AD, were descended from this Tarim region. And in one of the major inscriptions of the great king of the Kushan Empire, known as Kanishka, known as the Rabatak inscription, Kanishka refers to himself as a great Arya-speaking king who displaced the Yavana, that is the Greek language, and reinstalled the Arya language, the language of the Indo-Aryans, the Arya-speaking people, the Iranic people in this land again. So these are important conjectures and interesting conjectures that we might draw out in future presentations. Now, sometime towards the end of the 2nd millennium BC and till the beginning of the 1st millennium BC, the Kuru-Pancala state became this important kingdom in the heart of north-central India and commanding the central zone of the Madhya Desha. And it is conjectured that it was in this kingdom and through the patronage of these great kings of the Kuru-Panchala dynasty that a lot of the later Vedic culture was formed, and what you might call the early classical Hindu civilization. But the Kurus also play an important role in Buddhist literature, and early Buddhist literature refers in fact to various Kuru kings who played an important role as patrons of the Buddha. By the time of the rise of Buddhism, the Kurus were now dispersed throughout northern India and into central India, and there was this breakaway region of the Kurus known as the southern Kurus, established now in the Gangatic Valley. And here a Kuru state developed, It was not as powerful as the earlier Kuru-Pancala kingdom, but important nevertheless. And in fact, in one of the Jatakas, which are the birth stories of the earlier Buddhas, that is the Buddhas before Siddhartha Gautam, it is mentioned that a Bodhisattva or a realized Buddha was once born in the family of a Kuru king. So this is the Kuru Dhamma Jataka, or the Jataka of the Dhamma or Dharma of the Kurus. And it goes as follows, that in the capital city of Indraprastha, which was the central city which the Kurus had established in the vicinity of Delhi, a son was born to a Kuru king. This son went to Taxila to complete his education, and then he was appointed as a viceroy by his father. When he finally became the king, he, along with his family and all the officials of his land, used to obey the Kuru Dhamma or the Dharma of the Kurus. And this Dharma consisted of the observance of the 5 silas or the 5 rules of moral conduct. And this moral conduct then again brought lots of prosperity and riches to the land. At this time, there was another king in the land of Kalinga, and his kingdom was troubled by a drought and the lack of food and impending famine. So this Bodhisattva, who was the king of the Kurus, he had a royal elephant named Anjana Vasabha, which was brought to the kingdom of Kalinga in the belief that its presence might inspire the gods to bring rainfall into the land. But this did not work, and rain did not fall in Kalinga, because here in Kalinga, the Kuru Dhamma or the Dharma of the Kurus was not observed. And so the king of the Kurus sent his Brahmins and learned men to the kingdom of Kalinga, who preached the faith of the Kurus, the Dharma of the Kurus. And once the people began to follow this noble way, then prosperity was achieved as the gods were pleased, and rain once more began to fall into the land. So there are numerous other references in the Jatakas, which again are written at the time of the Buddha, after the Buddha, which is in the late 1st millennium BC, to these people of the Kurus. There is a reference to the great king known as Dhananjaya, who was from the race of Yudhishthira. And this was a king who was one of the most noble kings, who learned all the royal arts and reigned in his great capital city known as Indrapatana, which was the Buddhist way of referring to Indraprastha, which was of course the great capital city of the Kurus. So again, these are all references of a culture looking back at its history, of a 1,000-year-old history, and looking back at those glory days when the Kuru-Pancala Empire once ruled, 1,000 years before the time of the Buddha. And the time of the Buddha is one in which there are numerous smaller warring states. And in various of his sermons, the Buddha in fact is very critical of kings who had constant warfare and who bring misery upon their land. And this, referring back to the era of the Kurus, might be a way to imagine a golden age in which once there was a great empire of dharma or righteousness in all of the land. Now, the Kurus survived for long ages in the Indian civilizational system. And during the Buddha's time, sometime around 4th century BC, the monarchical constitution of these Kurus, who from their great cities of Hastinapur and Indraprastha were now reduced to some small cities around the Gangatic region, they shifted from a monarchical constitution to a republican constitution. And this was recorded by the great minister of the Mauryan Empire, who was also one of the first political theorists, a man by the name of Kautilya, who referred to the Kurus as a people who were republicans, but who enjoyed the status of rajas and were given equal ranks and rights both amongst themselves and were respected by all the people of the land. And the Kurus continued to appear in Indian history and Indian politics right till the 9th century AD, when a king was installed on the throne of the city of Kannauj, which again was an important city in this Gangatic region where once the Kurus had ruled. So this king, when he was installed, required the assent and the consent of neighboring people to rise to his throne, and the neighboring people, of course, were the Kurus, who still existed in the ancestral land. So this, of course, is the briefest possible introduction to these people who played such an important role in the history of India in the formative period of Indian civilization. And to understand the Kurus, of course, we also need to understand the Panchalas, who were the associated people. We will do that in the next part of this series.